All Might is one of people's favorite characters in My Hero Academia, and for good reason. Not only was he a wholesome, inspirational point for our main character Midoriya Izuku, but also due to his bombastic finish in the finale of Act 1, the Kamino arc. Putting everything, including his life, on the line to stop All For One, and entrusting the future to Midoriya left a hell of an impression on a lot of people. However, this event also left a lot of people wondering a few things, like what's next for the previous symbol of peace? Why did All Might not simply die at Kamino? When will we get to see him in action again? My Hero Academia, unfortunately, has contradictory answers to these questions. Let's start with Act 1. What did All Might's character represent? He was someone who rose above the reign of All For One, that had thrust the world into a hidden chaos, and came out of it on top. His primary ideology was to be a symbol of peace, a pillar of justice for all of society to rely on, someone that the hopeless masses can turn to and feel inspiration. This ideology of his was largely successful in what it wanted to achieve, putting Japan into a state of peace it hadn't seen since Quarks originated. His reign as a symbol and pillar inspired countless people around the world, like our protagonist or our rival character, but the consequences of this idea would slowly creep up on All Might. The nature of being a symbol was isolating. He didn't give himself time to form connections, to live a life outside of hero work, and while he postured as the symbol of peace, the remains of who lay under Toshinori Yagi slowly withered away. Even as he has a hole in his gut and a missing stomach, he doesn't give up. My Hero Academia builds up the conflict between All Might and All For One as the clashing of simple ideas of heroism and villainy. All For One literally being inspired by a comic book, and before comic book fans get mad at me again, yes, I understand that comics are more nuanced than this, blame Horikoshi, not me. The point is, All Might was heroism for the sake of it, and All For One was villainy for the sake of it. Heroism ends up defeating simple villainy, but at the cost of the pillar that holds up society crumbling to pieces. Where All Might fell, Toshinori Yagi still remained, and he was forced to bear witness to the aftermath of his reign. However, we had both All Might and All For One pass on the torch to their successors, who both represent more complex ideas of the two aforementioned concepts. Midoriya finding his way into wanting to be someone who finds out how villains became the way they are instead of punching and kicking his way out of scenarios, and Shigaraki, who had greater aspirations than ruling for the sake of it, but to destroy any and all things that represent his abusive upbringing and the complacency that All Might generated. And that still left the two original symbols of justice and fear to sit and watch the dominoes fall helplessly. All Might was told at a young age that those who are the strongest keep smiling, which is something he would end up negatively internalizing, hiding everything behind a smile, something he states explicitly to Midoriya in Chapter 1. Throughout Act 2, we witness Toshinori try to find a purpose in all of this. As he feels without power, he can't be there for his students. Aizawa tells him something he desperately needed to hear. Being Toshinori is all he needs to do. As long as he lives and is there for them, that is all the push they need. And this is something he took to heart, and in Act 3, Toshinori sees just how much damage his inspiration has caused to someone close to him, to Midoriya. He witnesses the failings of All Might firsthand in the Villain Hunt arc, and for the first time, he is on the receiving end of what it is like to try and support someone acting recklessly. He finds Midoriya's mask on the ground, made to imitate All Might's never-ending smile, and all he can think about is how he wishes he had told him that he understands the pain he is going through. He confronts what his reign had created, and joins in on the public lambasting of All Might by pointing out that he couldn't be there for his disciple when he was hurting. That is when Stain appears, telling him it had nothing to do with power. All Might would maintain that grin and devote every fiber of his being to the people. It doesn't fix everything, but it implants the idea in his head that he still has a role to play, and that he was never defined by his power, but by his beliefs. And the narrative regularly agrees with this sentiment. It has spent a lot of time post-Act 1 informing us on other methods of heroism. The remedial course arc for Bakugo and Shoto acts as a lesson that sometimes you can't just beat the shit out of children, much to Endeavor's dismay, and they get creative with their quirks to save these kids. In the following school festival arc, Jiro and the rest of the cast learn that music can also be some people's salvation, which is a core arc for Midoriya's progression in realizing that there is more to heroism than beating the bad guy, and his encounter with Gentle is one that leads him to want to find the root cause of people's villainy. This message is also repeatedly, and I mean repeatedly because it is to an obnoxious extent, shoved down our throat in the final arc. La Brava practices heroism through her hacking, and most of Class A practice heroism through keeping UA up, or the support course by helping the heroes prepare for battle, or the business course in their filming of a documentary. So let us recap All Might's journey. He was forced to confront the dangerous lack of self-worth his reign gave him through Midoriya, and while stumbling through the dark looking for a purpose, is told by two separate people that his presence alone can inspire greatness, that he has more than the power he once had, and to find his value in this new world. So can someone explain to me why, for the love of fucking God, him going out in an ass-pulled suit of armor is the solution? This decision by Horikoshi to have All Might re-enter the battle in an Iron Man suit is so antithetical to nearly every theme of My Hero Academia that I have just listed that it is genuinely staggering. Does it fit into the themes of utilizing other methods of heroism? No, absolutely not, as this is the same old reckless and destructive behavior that the All Might of the past would have exemplified. Putting his life on the line in an otherwise losing battle goes against everything All Might has represented over Act 2 and 3, and no amount of, quote, I'll reach these kids' heights dialogue pain will change that, because prior to Iron Might, Not a single person interpreted this as going out and risking his own life in a potentially fruitless attempt to halt the strongest man in the world, because All Might's character does not exist in the vacuum of random dialogue pulled out of your ass to justify garbage. Iron Might exists in the world of My Hero Academia that has spent countless arcs and chapters reinforcing that there are other ways to be a hero. It exists in a world where Toshinori as a character has progressed. It exists in a world where Toshinori had literally seen firsthand what it is like to experience the reckless existence that was All Might when he found Midoriya's mask on the ground. Despite being considered one of Villain Hunt's greatest haters, it seems most of the fandom did not actually absorb the message of not doing reckless shit on your own, to value your own self, and to find value outside of your power. All Might practices his own heroics even in MVA when he tried to save that woman from the falling pole. He practices his own heroics by establishing the very plan to decide the fate of the world. His very presence is heroic to these children, and in the same chapter as Iron Might, he literally gives Ida and Shoto a pep talk that helps give them courage to keep pressing on even after experiencing technically a defeat. All Might had found his purpose off of the battlefield, and it didn't require power. As Stain and Aizawa put it required Toshinori Yagi to be himself, which is exactly what his presence in the third act until now had been, an inspiring presence for all those around him. This line right here from All Might talks about how this has always been his battle, and that is such a slap in the face to everything that had come before. The theme of passing the torch has now been usurped nearly 3 times in this series alone, arguably with Endeavor becoming a more prominent character than Shoto, with All For One taking over Shigaraki, and now with All Might regressing for the sake of rawness and swag to take on Prime All For One. Completely disregarding, Kamino, the arc where 2 powerhouses left it all to their more nuanced successors, as well as completely disregarding any potential development from Villain Hunt, making the arc worse than it already was, because the point was that this was nobody's fight in particular, except quirkless All Might, I guess. One could argue that this is character regression, which is something I've talked about in previous videos and how it's not always inherently a bad thing, and I still agree with that. Regression is not a bad thing. However, regression usually has some form of build-up, rather than randomly occurring at the very end of a chapter for no particular reason, and generally regression occurs not at the very end of the series, with no chance to see the effect it has on the character or characters around them, because I remind you all again that My Hero Academia is in its final arc. An example of regression in My Hero Academia is Todoroki in the PLE arc, as being confronted by Inasa affects the way he views his relationship with his father, before rising above and even going beyond his prior progression, because the story wasn't about to end and had time to explore these ideas. It regresses Toshinori for the negative, completely undoing him finding his purpose outside of the battlefield, and removing not only his recognition of self-worth, but also bucking the story's idea of it. All the while undoing the spamming of other methods of heroism the story has been obnoxiously stating to us since the Final War's beginning, and stripping the last bit of the passing of the torch theme the narrative had going for it. But let's address the elephant in the room. Due to Golden Week, the chapters after Iron Might are yet to come out. Let's explore some of the suggestions or predictions people have made in an attempt to support Iron Might, and how it actually isn't story bending in any way, somehow. The number one suggestion is that All Might isn't actually going to fight and he's just going to be a distraction for All For One getting to Shigaraki, and this presupposes a couple things. First of all, that All Might, with support gear, will be able to form any meaningful distraction against one of the strongest men in the world who is only getting stronger. If support gear can stand up to All For One in any meaningful way, that's just bullshit. The strongest support gear we have seen in the series is something like Bakugo's gauntlets, and that's because all support gear exists to bolster an already existing quirk, not to stand in for one. If support gear was capable of making anybody a capital H hero, as in the occupation, then we would have seen that throughout the story. It would have opened up so many more avenues for quirkless heroes that it retroactively dampens the message that not everyone can be a hero. But everyone has heroism inside of them, because now if you pull yourself up by your bootstraps like quirkless All Might, you can get enough money to become a hero. Something that could be a pungent side of world building if it didn't reek of an ass pull for a hype cliffhanger. The second response is that All For One doesn't need to be stalled. Ignoring that he is currently in warp range of Shigaraki apparently, My Hero Academia is not real. The passage of time in this story is not real. All For One only has to be stalled because of a choice by the author, and the author made the choice of it being All Might for some reason. It is crazy how often this has to be explained to people, to understand that every choice in a story is made by an author, and does not always inherently have to adhere to the tenets of realism. Literally anybody else could have stopped him here like the Stars and Stripes fighter jets. There are so many other paths to take, and I'm certain that this is not the best option to take. So no, even if it's just to serve as a distraction, I don't like it. I would rather have All Might use an Iron Man suit if he really needed to use one to save people independent of this event. The second suggestion is that All Might's going to fight and die, therefore the Iron Man suit doesn't actually matter. My response is, hey, All Might dying kind of sucks. When your character is about finding a purpose or value in your own life after being subjected to the consequences of your actions and ideology, having the grand lesson at the end of the day be, okay, you're gonna die now, never finding happiness and doing something recklessly in vain, kind of sucks. especially after the story has already hammered home why you shouldn't be doing reckless things in vain. This is certainly a better option than him winning though, but to be honest, they're both awful. Number 3 is Hologram All Might, and I would instantly take back everything I have said in this video, and we would be seated to gas this up to high heaven, as it would exemplify perfectly that All Might knows his life has value by not actually putting himself out there, and would retroactively make every single person who told me that Iron Might makes thematic sense look very, very silly, and that would be very funny. However, I am not thinking this is likely considering that we saw All Might walk out with a briefcase, and he gave the speech while visibly standing in the rain, so instead, we are likely getting an awful event instead. Iron Might seems like one of those things where no matter where this goes, we're not cooking. It spits in the face of All Might's character, it spits in the face of multiple primary themes of the series, and it somehow spits in the face of the final arc itself, which already isn't good. I'm sorry about being so negative about My Hero Academia recently, this arc is just rough. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe for the funny YouTube algorithm. You can check the description down below to follow me on Twitter, where I'm objectively correct all the time. You can also join my Discord, where we talk about My Hero Academia, ReZero, Jujutsu Kaisen, and stuff like that. And you can also now become a YouTube member, which basically just gives you access to behind-the-scenes content, a little badge on comments, and live stream chats, and access to some emotes. Only do so if you want to support the channel, though. But that's about it, though. Thank you for watching. See ya.